in general. And a couple of years ago, we added a very important element to this tradition, which is to produce the Progressive Yearbook. And I can immediately report to you that the Progressive Yearbook 2023 has arrived. It's in my hand. You already have some copies also outside the room. This is to take pictures. I will speak about it a little bit later, because before turning to the product itself, let's reflect a little bit about the political year which is behind us. And we will have two speakers to discuss the political environment. First of all, I will ask our president, Maria Jo Rodrigues, to elaborate on the political landscape around us. And then we will have Agnes Jongerius from the SND group, from the European Parliament, also to follow up on some of the key points of the progressive agenda today. Maria João, the floor is.
We are meeting today in a place we would like to make a place for inspiration, but also a home for human gathering, to see the friends again, to have new ideas, to have the pleasure just to be together, which is the case today. So, look, we just concluded a meeting of our FEPS bureau, and we assessed again the situation. We know that we Europeans, we are confronted with a very challenging situation. Even I refer to yesterday events when there was a historical decision to strengthen the support to Ukraine while fighting against Putin's invasion. We know this was an historical day yesterday. I think it was the right choice, but we know that we are going to a very risky road. And why this is happening, and nobody knows the timeline for this horizon, for this war and possible ceasefire, we are also dealing with a domestic crisis, economic, social crisis, after just leaving the pandemics. So this is really hard in our lives, but we also felt during the pandemics that we were inventing something new based on authentic solidarity at all levels, the local, the national, the European. This was indeed a social democratic moment. And we also believe that we need to have a social democratic, progressive answer to the challenges ahead of us. Let me also underline that we also took another historical decision when we announced that Europe should prepare a new big enlargement, starting with the Balkans, but also open to Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia. This is also an historical decision which will shape the European continent. And we know that for this to work, we need to prepare some internal institutional reforms. So we also have this task in our hands. We, FEPS, work a lot when preparing the so-called Conference on the Future of Europe. The demands from citizens were clear. So let's have this in mind, these demands. And let me also underline that while all this is taking place here in the European continent, we are also dealing with the global challenges, the climate, the digital, the social inequalities, and we are in need of a real reform of global governance. So I'm so pleased that all these issues are somehow referred in our new yearbook. They are reflected in our work plan in FEPS. We have a very engaged team in FEPS. We have very engaged friends, as you can see today, full room with us. And let me also conclude by underlining that we made a decision on selecting the personality of the year. Very good choice. We are so pleased to have Mayor Grzegorz Pietruczuk among us. He's really a hero. And we are so proud of your work. You are, let me tell you, the best of European spirit. So many thanks again. And here we are, and I'm so pleased now to be followed by our good friend MEP Agnes Jongerius. Such a good work on the social front, and very honored to have you here. Agnes, please.
Thank you, and also from my side, I like this opportunity to also, at the near end of the month, still say Happy New Year. For me, it's also okay to wish each other Happy New Year half March, but let's do it now. And I think indeed it's a very happy gathering here. And first of all, I think, László, let me say to you and the whole team, thank you for organizing this event. Thank you for the opportunity to speak and to a little bit reflect on where we stand. As João said, I'm the spokesperson on behalf of our political family on social issues. So I hope you will not be disappointed that I'm not touching upon the Western Balkans or issues around foreign policy, because I know there are people much better placed than that. I'd like to talk about the social policies, and I'd like to use the opportunity to not only look back at what we have accomplished in the last year, 2022. I think it's indeed reflected in the yearbook. And I think there are some results to be mentioned from the work of our political family, of which we can take big pride. But I think it's also important to use this moment to look ahead to this next year, the last full year of this mandate, and the preparation of the elections in 2024. You have both already indicated we are in a way on a crossroad. The inflation is skyrocketing. Climate change is more and more visible, while at the same time a war at our continent for almost a year. If you have asked me, let's say, same time last year, if I would have expected this as a possibility, I really would not have thought so. I would have believed it. I think before coming to the European Parliament, I worked for the trade union movement. I've never seen these inflation figures in my working lifetime, and that's already quite some time. And I must say, this world is worrying me. And I think if we are all honest, it's also worrying you. But let's say, I also see the possibility of hope, because there is this potential of change. We, the Socialists and Democrats, have to address the cost of living crisis, because if we don't do it, who else is doing it? So this is why we presented what we called our so-called winter solidarity package. We need to increase the level of investment, and we need social investment, and we need social conditionalities. And of course, we can only invest if we also create new revenues. And this revenue should not come at the cost of the workers, but should be paid by super billionaires who make massive profits out of a crisis. And therefore, we desperately, urgently need a European windfall profit tax. And that's a social democratic answer. I think it's also the only answer given at this moment. We need a social resilience package, where we have already managed to ensure a gas price cap. We have ensured a temporary suspension of national rent indication schemes as essential. But I'm afraid we haven't seen the end of it yet, so we need to continue pushing for these proposals, because we cannot afford to see people being disconnected from gas or heating while they're not able to pay their price. And on top of that, we need more funds. Of course, we have a new fund in the European arena being established. It's not there yet. We have to vote on it, the Social Climate Fund. Of course, we also have the ESF, the European Social Fund, but we also need funding for instance, the quick implementation of the so-called child guarantee, a result of our political family. But now we have to push for adequate funding for this proposal, because we know that it's the poorest in our society who are paying the price of this high inflation and energy crisis. We are pushing in the proposal also for the continuation and the refinancing of the SURE, the program for keeping people in work while, for instance, the production is at a lower level. And like I said, we, the Social Democrats, we together, the whole progressive family, have to step up. In the Parliament, we have been pleading for a new social summit, including all the EU institutions and also the social partners, in order to discuss the challenges of this extraordinary situation we are facing with increasing inflation and its social consequences. We had this idea that the Czech presidency were favorable for this idea. But then they said, sorry, our prime minister didn't understand completely the question and they made a mistake when answering the European Parliament. We are also pushing the Swedes now for organizing this proposal. Because yes, we did reach some very important goals in the past year, but I think now it's time for a fast-track implementation of the minimum wage direction. We also need a big push to the work around the platform directive. We are still advocating a minimum income directive with the purpose of safeguarding the rights of a decent life. And most of all, I think we need to take our own promises seriously. And it's the President who, in her time in the European Parliament, pushed for the European Pillar of Social Rights. And that was a work very well done. We had a Porto summit 2 years ago in May in Portugal, where prime ministers, members of the Commission, of social partners, members of the European Parliament came together and say, okay, we're going to make this social pillar a reality. One of these pillars was the promise, one of the promises of Porto was the promise to reduce poverty. And I think that was a very, very topical promise. But we also know that in the present economic situation, instead of reducing poverty, we see poverty on the rise. So it's important to push on the results from our political family, make it a reality. I think we should do this also to have a clear position in the run-up to the next elections. In these difficult times, and it is difficult times at the moment, I think we should not put our values up for the grab. It's our slogan is that we are in favor of a race, not of a race to the bottom, but a race of the top. And if we are working closely together, I think in this year we can reach this goal. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maria João. Thank you very much, Agnes. This political framing of the discussion, I think, is very important. We can test against this political landscape whether we got it right, how we selected the topics for the yearbook, whether we really went for the most essential issues. Now, indeed, in the next part of the evening, we turn to the product itself and discuss a little bit the content of this book, and we will be helped and introduced by a little video which colleagues have produced, just to highlight also visually some of the most interesting points. Thank you very much. You might have seen that most of these pictures are the ones which you find on the front page. From Sassoli until Ven, you have a bit of a political labyrinth. But I'm sure you will find your way in this political labyrinth once you have read the studies. On this very difficult year, obviously, it's not easy to select topics and ensure that everything is delivered well, but we have 3 editors, and I would like to introduce the 3 editors. Anya Skripek, sitting here. Would you like to stand up? Hedvig Justo in the second row. Also editor-in-chief of the Progressive Post magazine, and the third editor is myself. In fact, from the very start, we have been together launching and masterminding the Progressive Yearbook, which had one motto when we thought that this product is missing from the library of the Brussels Progressive, which is the intention to keep the analysis alive for several years, to give a shelf life to the analysis which we produce. And if 4 or 5 years from now, somebody is interested in what happened in 2022, you can look back into the chronology, you can find out what we thought about the social crisis or the energy crisis of this year, and which countries were in the center of the discussion. So we try to select the topics accordingly, and shortly I will give the floor to some of the authors. We have the pleasure of having one of the authors also with us, but also 3 authors will actually connect through the video link if the video link works. And we also will have 2 discussants to kick off the discussions, but otherwise, obviously, the rest of the evening will be there to digest what you read or what you might have read. Because the authors will introduce their topics, I will just explain briefly the selection of the 2 countries, because we always have country studies. And this time around, we selected Sweden, because Sweden was a shock last year. It's a political development which is very, very, very unwelcome, even if the Social Democrats improved their score, but had to leave government. And at the same time, Sweden is now giving the presidency of the council, so in a way passively influencing what is happening with the further development of the European Union. On the other hand, we also selected Greece, because with the northern one, we also have one from the south, but also because Greece made this big trajectory from being an economic crisis country to a political crisis country. And the elections in Greece will be also a very important milestone in the forthcoming year. I believe if you have seen a succession of the yearbooks, you will find this more outward looking. Why? Because a European war also has a lot of global ramifications. And you will see that there is a very, very strong part with the global focus, starting with the President chapter on the New Global Deal, which is basically a topic that will be a guiding one for FEPS, because we are building up for September the United Nations summit discussing indeed the chances of a new global deal. So you will see FEPS working on this topic very seriously in 2023. And we always close with some predictions. I must say that this is my hobby horse. So I'm the predictions editor of this yearbook. We will also discuss some of the predictions, but exactly because Agnes was saying that this war was not expected even 1 year ago, look, we have to go back to the previous yearbook. Did anybody predict this war? Of course, nobody said on which day Putin would invade, right? So it would have been only the CIA to be able to tell, and I think they had a clue. On the other hand, we had one prediction from Helsinki, Professor Patomaki here, which I would like to quote, page 218. The increasingly acute conflicts in Eastern Europe and the South China Sea have the potential to escalate into full-scale war, even to nuclear war. Moreover, the COVID-19 crisis has further exacerbated some of the underlying tendencies, for instance, through increasing inequalities and triggering nationalist responses, including by the EU. And the same prediction article has a little bit of elaboration on Russia itself, and it says that during the Putin era, Russia has been involved in a handful of limited wars, and half of them continue as low-intensity conflicts. These conflicts have become a hefty economic and political burden to Russia, especially the Ukrainian conflict, while the overall economic growth between 14 and 20 has been negligible, affecting Putin's popularity, and yet we also know that regimes can respond to political opposition, economic difficulties, and rising or high inequalities by intensifying nationalist sentiment and generating rally around the flag effects, as has happened in many places recently, from Brazil and India to China and Turkey. So in a way, look, I don't want to pretend that we said it, but I think it's important to invite each other to this exercise. Let's not only analyze what we went through, but let's try to think a little bit ahead. What kind of dynamics are coming out of what we are experiencing today? On this point, indeed, I would like to express how happy I am that we managed to invite 4 authors. They will speak one after the other. And in particular, I welcome Izabela Surwillo, who is with us. She came from Copenhagen, and she wrote a very interesting chapter about the energy front, the energy crisis, and this, I believe, is extremely fascinating. Izabela, why don't you take the floor, and we would like to listen to your presentation.
Thank you so much. I believe I'm a bit of an outsider in this crowd. However, I was approached to write an opinion piece on energy security, which is close to my work, but also to my heart, so I gladly accepted. So I'll just summarize some of the key points of that opinion piece. Naturally, Russian invasion in Ukraine last year shook continental geopolitics, but also resulted in unprecedented energy crisis in Europe. For the most part, it is because the EU was so dependent on Russia. So as we know, it was dependent for 40% of its gas, nearly 1/3 of its oil, 46% of its coal. And faced with crisis and war, it found itself in a very difficult situation because, especially when it comes to gas, it is very difficult to diversify. We need expensive infrastructure, so new pipeline projects or LNG terminals to do that. And over the last year, Russia cut over 80% of its gas, and this is a critical energy resource which is used in Europe for heating, industrial processes, but also power generation. So, of course, that caused enormous crisis, especially that gas was supposed to be also bridge fuel for many countries to help them in the transition to a low-carbon economy. So what we are witnessing right now is that, on the one hand, we need to phase out Russian fossil fuels. Then we have to really speedy speed up our diversification, which is difficult in some sectors such as gas especially, and we need to accelerate transition to low carbon economy. And all of this together creates, of course, this is an enormous task. And this will require an enormous effort. There will be trade-offs involved. In the long term, if we do this well enough, then the supply of energy in Europe would be, of course, improved long term, and we would proceed with energy transition. But there are trade-offs involved. There's societal cost, as we are seeing with skyrocketing energy prices, as it was mentioned before also by other speakers. And there are sometimes very difficult, technical and market limitations. So there's only as much as we can do. But I would like to look at it in a little bit broader perspective. First, asking the question, how did we get there? And then, what should actually guide European energy policy as we go forward? So if we think of energy, affairs in Europe in a perspective, there seems to be this divergence of views of what energy security actually entails. It was there for many years. Countries in the West, especially in Berlin, there was this belief in this mutual dependence, in the increasing interdependence in the economic sector between Russia and EU. And there was a belief that, if the trade increases, that Russia over time will be brought closer to Europe, that it will have a spillover effect also in other areas. It will democratize Russia and bring it closer to us. And Germany or politicians in Berlin, they also did not perceive Russia in that sense as a threat, because it was considered, as more dependent on the EU than vice versa. And energy security was perceived more in economic rather than just security terms. Then on the other side of the spectrum, we of course have Central and Eastern Europe. Countries in the region were locked in this like Soviet era infrastructure, so they were heavily dependent on Russia, and also for historical reasons they were more wary when it comes to being so dependent on a single supplier. So they tried to diversify, they tried to securitize the energy policies, so it was a matter of urgency, not just like economics, but they were also exposed more to the episodes of energy blackmail. When the war with Ukraine started last year, it seemed to come as a surprise to some actors that Russia would actually use energy resources as a tool for political pressure. However, the idea that energy can be used as a weapon was there in Russia already in the 1990s. It was actually part of the strategy that with the loss of political military power in the neighborhood, energy resources can be used strategically. And since the 1990s, the countries in the region, including the Baltic states, Ukraine, Belarus, Georgia, Moldova, were exposed to a number of episodes of energy blackmail over the years. So, the region was not just paranoid, there were like real issues over there. And in that context, when the development of pipelines such as Nord Stream 1 and 2 happened, there was of course the clash of those competing views, because Central and Eastern Europe was calling for more solidarity when it comes to energy security. They were concerned with their own interest, but also with interest of Ukraine specifically, of the fact that Ukraine would lose its transit fees, it would use certain economic and political leverage vis-a-vis Russia if it's no longer a transit state. And that, especially when it comes to Nord Stream 2 pipeline, which was developed already in the context of post-2014, when Russia annexed part of Ukrainian territories, it kind of sent a clear signal to Moscow that energy trade will not stop with Europe, even given such developments in the neighborhood. So those views only started to sort of align with the outbreak of war last year. Now it seems that the agenda is coming more, together. Of course, now it's like immense crisis ahead of us, with some key regulations such as Repower EU from last year. This was like the first blueprint of how to become more independent of Russian energy sources, the fossil fuels. In the short term, the easiest, most effective way is, of course, to focus on cutting energy demand, improving energy efficiency measures. However, then as we go forward, unfortunately, there are trade-offs involved because we have like this pressing energy crisis versus like longer-term climate agenda. And there will be choices to be made, as we've already seen. Should we burn coal if it sidetracks our, climate transition? Should we go for more expensive sources because we need those sources, even though they are costly and they will hit also like a societal sector? But as we go forward, I think what's really important, and it was already mentioned many times, it's what many states are also trying to do now, is to shield the most vulnerable businesses and consumers across Europe with a number of policies, but it remains to be seen how those policies will actually play out. But I think what's also very important, sort of my last point on the policy level, is also to make sure that solidarity, this like wider solidarity, really drives European energy policy going forward. And that should be in terms of general policy outlook, but also coordinated efforts on different strategic projects that are, improving energy infrastructure, making pipelines, electricity grids interconnected, making sure there are solidarity agreements when it comes to gas between states. So when one party is hit with the crisis, others will come to rescue. That, EU states are, for example, together making use of this new policy instruments, such as this platform for buying resources now jointly as the EU, to make sure that the gas storage is full before next winter season. Because as much as we are in the crisis now, next winter presents even bigger challenge, because we will need to fill the gas storage with gas that will not be coming from Russia anymore. It has to be obtained somewhere else. And if that is not done, then again, it will be businesses and individuals who are really hit the most. Not to be too pessimistic, but of course it's a major challenge ahead, and I think the bottom line is really that the only way forward is to do it together. It really has to be coordinated. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think it was a masterful summary of your own piece. You can take a seat here, but let's first also listen to the other authors, and then subsequently we will have a little time for an exchange here. I can see Anna Chupeska and Jack Thompson connecting with us. I think because of the thematics, maybe we should start with Jack, because he also connects with the big issues and the question of the war from an American perspective. Jack, would you like to come into the discussion and summarize in a few points your paper?
Sure. First of all, thanks to László, Anya, and Hedy for inviting me to contribute to the 2023 edition of the Progressive Yearbook. It's really a privilege to have my ideas published here alongside this all-star lineup of writers. Before I speak about my contribution, I should also probably say a word in praise of the yearbook itself. In an age of resurgent illiberalism, large-scale warfare in Europe, an intensifying climate crisis, and stubborn economic and social inequality, it's more important than ever that the prominent, persuasive voices present the progressive perspective on European and global events. The Progressive Yearbook has been doing this for a number of years now, and it's really encouraging to see all of the issues that I mentioned and more included in this year's edition. So to László, Anya, and Hedy, congrats, and keep up the good work. So my own contribution kind of summed up in a few points. In writing about the 2022 US midterm elections, I really tried to take kind of a broader long-term perspective and try to understand the ways in which political dysfunction complicates the transatlantic relationship. And I essentially make 4 points in the piece. My first point is that the US political system has been destabilizing for many years now by powerful forces, and we're finally starting to see over the last couple of years the results of these forces. For instance, the Republican Party has been radicalizing for a long time, and many in the party are increasingly indifferent to democratic values and processes. This includes a growing minority who view violence as an acceptable form of political engagement. Intensifying negative partisanship is another problem. Americans increasingly distrust major institutions in American life, in large part because Republicans dislike and even hate Democrats, and Democrats increasingly dislike and even hate Republicans. Misguided trade policies have led to massive job losses in big portions of the country in some key industries, and no one's figured out how to fix this problem. So-called deaths of despair, deaths from suicide, drug use, alcohol abuse, have climbed dramatically over the last 2 decades, and are now, in 2020, there were 186,000 of them. So it's a massive problem. My second main point is that these profound problems at home that I just mentioned, along with big challenges abroad, such as China's rise, the emergence of a multipolar order in which US power is diminished, mean that a large minority of Americans question the wisdom of internationalism and multilateralism. More specifically, they've embraced protectionist trade policies, they're sympathetic to illiberal leaders, even those such as Vladimir Putin, and they're skeptical of alliances, including NATO. Third, because most of the disaffected Americans that I just referenced tend to vote for Republican candidates. For the first time since the early Cold War era, in other words, since the first time since the early 1950s, there's no broad public or political consensus about an overall strategy for U.S. foreign policy. Instead, in the coming years, the United States is going to go back and forth between internationalist phases when we have Democrats, such as Joe Biden in power, and nationalist phases, which is what we saw with Donald Trump, and what we'll probably see in the next Republican administration. These nationalist phases will mean hostility toward multilateral action and institutions, and ambivalence about engagement with partners such as Europe. My final and I guess most important point is that even as the United States remains the major power partner of choice for Europe and continues to play a crucial role in European security, Europe needs to do more. It needs to do more to lessen the gap between US and European military capabilities. It needs to do more to bolster its preparedness to handle various kinds of challenges in its own neighborhood independent of the United States. And it needs to do more to facilitate its ability to develop consensus on big external questions. Of course, doing more will make Europe a better partner for the United States and might even bolster internationalists in Washington, D.C. But much more importantly, doing more will allow Europe to protect its interests and values during periods when Washington reverts to more nationalist perspective. Trump may not return to the White House in 2 years. There's a pretty good chance that in 2024, 2028, or at the very latest by 2032, a nationalist Republican will once again occupy the White House. When that day comes, Europe needs to be better prepared to act independently and effectively on its own. All right, I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you. I think point 4 connected very well with the development of the recent days, right? So it's very, very topical. And there was this gently hidden prediction at the end, which we can discuss later. Let's move to Anna. Anna is connecting with us from Skopje, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
And she contributed with a prediction. Would you like to explain your perspective on the Western Balkans and the potential for integration?
Well, thank you, László. But first of all, let me express my gratitude for giving me the opportunity to give my contribution to the edition and also to this forum consequently. So it is a great honor for me. And why is that? Primarily because the edition again has justified its genuine progressivity, while in the same time successfully combines the progressive agenda in situ with comprehensive topics, as well as it has the necessary popular tone, both on the level of the topic and on the level of the authors. And that is excellent indeed. So chapters in the yearbook, they're really with sharp analysis, and they also express very original and very suggestive solutions to progressive challenges. Such, for example, that kind of articles is indeed authored by László Andor, who, among other delicate issues that he addressed, he sequenced a frame of the infantilized Europe, which, of course, that has to mature. And to this, I would add that Europe also has to ensure that the war will not be spilled over out of the current battleground, and especially should not be spilled over the Balkans. And in that context, indeed, László's observations are particularly instructive, as well as those presented by Anya, who, among other original observations of hers, put a note on the social democratic impetus towards the enlargement and on the subject related to the subject of the geopolitical Europe, while addressing the need of simultaneous juxtaposition of enlargement parallel to the process of deepening. And in line with these mentioned topics referent to the enlargement, I also have my short contribution in this edition, since the enlargement it is an existential need for Macedonian citizens, but also for the overall Western Balkan region, having in mind the actual securitization reflux that is currently going on. And in this regard, the enlargement appears to be work in progress, but still unfortunately remains as unfinished business, because the security implications for this region are referent for Europe, and this particularly in highly militarized context that we are actually currently living within. Furthermore, and the most important thesis here is that after the Madrid NATO summit last year, when there was expressed a strong commitment of reaffirmation of the common value and common operational realm for EU and NATO, there is no longer place for any excuse in delaying the enlargement process, but to the contrary. However, the enlargement opens also possibility of some new specific forms of itself. For example, giving the possibility of restrictive veto use for the newcomers as accommodative to the issue of deepening, which is also necessary as a parallel process. So, but this has to be further developed. However, in this edition, also our President Maria, as László already said, has an excellent article. Also, Hedvig Gustav, her article is remarkable, dealing with migration. Peter Sanchez gives a popular dynamism to the edition, and I'm not going to state all the authors. All of them are really, really very interesting and most importantly with progressive ideas. So I would like to use this opportunity and to take this opportunity to congratulate to Grzegorz Pietruczuk, who really deservedly won the recognition of Progressive Person of the Year. And I would like to invite all of you to read the yearbook, which I am sure will enrich you in any sense. And of course, it will be stimulative for you. And if I may so, it can give you an emancipatory tone to or effect on you. So thank you for your attention. I'm done with my presentation.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Anna, also for the very kind comments on various other chapters and authors. And I think since Pascal Lamy is a little bit delayed, we come to his intervention a little bit later when he can connect us with us from London. I would like to invite two interventions, which is not from authors, but specifically from friends, colleagues, who would like to comment on what can be read in the yearbook. Starting with Margarida Marques, who is a member of the European Parliament. Margarida, you have been working with FEPS on these issues, and indeed we really appreciate your passionate engagement in a discussion of a very difficult topic, which is economic governance and more specifically fiscal rules. And we have been honored by Joaquin Almunia, former commissioner, former party leader from Spain, who looked back to his previous portfolio and gave some insight of where this reform of the economic governance is going. But since you are now working on this, what do you think about the topic and what do you think about Almunia's comments?
Okay, I start to congratulate Maria João and you for not only for this event, but all the events you organize during the year. So this is not clear from your yearbook. It's interesting, very interesting text. I had the opportunity to look to some of them and to hear from different colleagues the resume of some articles. But it's clear that you do much more than is in the yearbook, and I need also, and you remember it very well, I had the help of the FEPS to prepare my report that finally was adopted in the Parliament on the revision of the fiscal rules, because it was, as you imagine, we start to prepare the report having from the other political families the statement that no, it's not needed to revise fiscal rules. And finally, we adopt a strong report. Of course, I was the rapporteur, but I need to say that I did it because I have a lot of help with a group of experts that we created and helped me. Concerning the text written by Almunia, of course, I support the text written by Almunia, and I think that Almunia is the appropriate person to write this paper, because he used to be commissioner in charge of economic issues, and he needed to deal with the current fiscal rules. But if before COVID, it was clear that rules would be changed. It's why the Commission, February, before the pandemic, had already published communication to start the public debate. And it was clear that rules must be revised because the growth was not much more than zero, and public investment, economic growth, not more than zero, and public investment very, very low. So it was clear that with the fiscal rules, we couldn't work and we couldn't progress at European level, not in economic growth, social rights, employment, and so on. So this is so clear that when COVID arrived, Commission proposed to activate the general scapegoat. It means to suspend the rules on the Stability and Growth Pact, on deficit, on debt, because it was clear that we couldn't give a European answer having in mind the fiscal rules, and they were suspended. And they are, the general scapegoat is still activated. So, Almunia made some comments on the communication that the Commission published 1 month ago. And this communication, and you know that the responsibility of this communication is first of all from Paolo Gentiloni. I know that he made his best. There are some positive points, but we have still some concerns in our political family in the European Parliament. On the positive aspects, the first one is the involvement of the European Parliament. And what we demand is the European Parliament and the Council on an equal footing for the revision of the rules, but also on the development of the economic period of time, on the economic semester and so on, European Parliament must be on an equal footing than the Council. The second point is that these rules, as the Commission is proposing, are simpler and clear, because the current rules are not simple, are not clear, with so many revisions that nowadays it's very, very difficult to understand exactly all the rules. The third point is, and this is very important, a more gradual and country-specific reduction of the debt to make fiscal space for strategic investments. This is very important because we know that nowadays the average of the public debt is around 100%, and Maastricht criteria is 60%. Demand to member states to reduce the debt on the rule 120, it's impossible. It's demand the opposite of the social politics that Agnes Jongerius before explained that we need to have. Another positive point is less use of hard-to-measure variables, and the clarification and simplification is an effort of the new rules. Another point is the fact that this proposal that the Commission put on the table are inspired, and the word is inspired, on Next Generation EU example. So we prefer to read is the blueprint, it's not the case, but is inspired. And this is the big difference, and we need to look to this difference. Why? Because with the European semester exercise, Commission will give to member states some recommendations. And we know that the biggest part of the recommendations were not respected, were not followed by member states. Why? Because sometimes there were not political will, and other situations there were not money enough to do reforms or investments. And what we have with Next Generation EU is a plan with reforms and investments and money to finance these reforms and investments. And this is very important, and this new mechanism is completely new, is the European answer to the crisis. But we need to look to this experience because it's very well done, and at the same time, it created trust between institutions and member states. And this is something that we need to look to for the future, and it's why inspired is good, but it's not enough. We prefer to have a blueprint. The negative aspects. So, of course, there are some negative aspects. For example, the first, the most important in our view, in our group, SED, is no reference to any fiscal capacity. So it's clear that we need an European fiscal capacity to support investment and also to avoid fragmentation. And this is very important to support European priorities and how these European priorities can be developed in member states and how can they be financed, and to have, like in Next Generation EU, to have the fiscal capacity to support member states and to avoid new fragmentation. We know very well that Next Generation EU is one-off, but we know that we need to learn lessons and not lose the innovation and the positive aspects of the Next Generation EU. So a fiscal capacity is needed. By the way, it's very interesting because fiscal capacity is not in the communication of the Commission, but Commission decided to annex to the communication the results of the public debate and all the main actors in the public debate, like ECB, IMF, EIB, European Fiscal Board. They proposed to create this fiscal capacity. Another and the last point, because I can look to you and I need to finish. The other point that for us is very is a negative point is to remember the Maastricht criteria. It means the 3% on the debt and 60%, 3% on the deficit and 60% on the debt. So we know that is Maastricht criteria. But this is a key point that we need to look to these criteria to know exactly what can we do in the framework of these criteria. And for example, the fact that the Commission is open for a specific path per country to reduce the debt is a positive way in the framework of the Maastricht criteria. There are a problem nowadays. Of course, we need a lot of details because the communication had not details enough to understand how the Commission will assess these national plans for the reduction of the debt. But there are a new problem. This is the transition. It means member states in spring must have political guidelines to prepare the national budgets, and they need to have concrete political guidelines. And now we don't have it. Well, we don't have them because we can't start 1st January 2024 with the current rules. We need to have a transition period, and this transition must be clear because it's not clear nowadays, not yet clear nowadays, if the general escape clause will be activated or deactivated next year, but the trend is more near the deactivation than to maintain the clause activation. So it means we need new rules. We need new rules for the future, and we need to clarify the transition because we need to import the European social pillar and the compromises that we have, and we need to have a resilient and a resilient economy. Of course, the new proposal of the Commission on the sovereignty fund is something that we need to look to understand exactly what European Union can do, namely on industrial development. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I hope Joaquin Almunia was watching this because I think it was really an evidence that Margarida is preparing for a big battle in 2023, and if we can support you in this big battle about the fiscal rules, obviously we will do what we can. You didn't mention Valdis Dombrovskis, but I think those who can read between the lines detected that some of these issues were about the Dombrovskis Gentiloni balancing act. If I can help with the resolution of this puzzle. Look, I also invited our colleague Daniel Kopp, who is a very experienced editor. Most of you probably read the International Politics and Society Journal, on which Daniel has been working for some years. Not anymore. He has another important mission to address social questions. But we asked Daniel, because he's an experienced editor, just to comment in a very, very honest way. Collegially, you can skip the compliments. Just tell us what you think is okay, what you think can be perhaps criticized or challenged in this volume.
Thanks so much for the invitation, László. To offer my reflections on what I think the Progressive Yearbook does and why I think you should all read it. I must say, everything that I'm going to say now, I wrote down before coming here. So if there are any similarities with what you have said in your introduction, it's purely coincidental. And as a student, my academic background is in literary studies, so I will also offer some aesthetic reflections perhaps in the end, but for the most part we'll stick to the last 3 years were marked by rapid political transformations, or as Helen Bernard calls it in the yearbook, in her article, 3 blows that affected Europe and the world. The first one was the COVID pandemic, the first blow, which led not just to a health crisis, but also a social crisis, and probably the biggest upwards wealth transfer in the history of humanity. Estimated 500 million people having fallen into poverty, the wealth of the world's 2,660 billionaires has risen by 3.7 trillion US dollars since 2020. The second blow, for which Hallen's article delivers all the devastating numbers, was the cost of living crisis of 2022, both as a result of the fallout from the pandemic and the war in Ukraine. We saw poverty rise, which saw debt rise, in particular across the global south, and spikes in food poverty and widespread destitution. Now we're in the middle of a third blow in 2023, a blow of recession, continued high prices, inflation, a world that might become less rather than more peaceful in the future. And on top of that sits, of course, the climate crisis, which is perhaps, I would say, the only topic that falls a bit short in the volume. In such a rapidly changing time, it couldn't be a more daunting task to produce a yearbook that provides meaningful contributions that won't be expired by the time the current poly crisis, so the interlocking and mutually reinforcing crisis we're faced with today, has entered its next stage. In other words, it's difficult to produce political content that manages to have a shelf life, as you put it. I think the volume manages to achieve that, and I would return to it in the coming months to situate the evolving political moment, and I think it helps us progressives to chart a way forward to address the poly crisis. How does it do that? What does the yearbook do? I think it's because the volume scope manages to both zoom in very closely, as in Eric Sandström's article on the shifting electoral landscape, the widening economic inequality, neoliberalized school system, the challenges of the welfare state, and immigration policy in the case of what's so regularly regarded as a social democratic paradise, Sweden. But I think at the same time, the volume zooms out to find answers to the big questions of our time. László's opening essay on the Russian war in Ukraine breaks down, with I think sober analysis and a clear moral compass, the history of the war, the broad political debates that emerged from it, and the way it has reshaped EU policy. Beyond Europe, the volume also addresses crucial questions of global governance. In an emerging multipolar world marked by US-China competition, a potential reinvigoration of BRICS, and Latin American integration, and a widening North-South divide, what kind of order will come next, and what kind of order should Europe argue and push for at the international level, and with which political allies? That's the crucial question, to which I think, for instance, Maria, with her article, provides an insightful contribution. She says, the current global order is undergoing a large-scale transformation, existential challenges emerging for all of humankind, increasing inequalities within and between countries and generations, competing global strategies between great powers, fragilities of the multilateral system, and powerful disturbing triggers such as the Ukraine war. But it's not just between regions and nation states that we see political tensions and mutations, but also within them. As neoliberalism has sought, in the words of Quinn Slobodian, to encase global economic governance from democratic pressures, so has this very encasement created its own mutated pressure, or what we nowadays call a backlash, both on the left and the right, whether that's the Occupy Wall Street protests, the populist wave post-2008, or the right-wing reactionary talk of a globalist agenda, part of which is the rise and success of anti-gender movements in Europe and beyond, as Roman Kuhar lays out in the volume. Therefore, I think it's the urgent task of progressives to repoliticize global governance and render it more inclusive and democratic, both for civil society and all nations of the world, a task for which Maria and Pascal Lamy in his article provide an important political and intellectual starting point. But the volume does not only provide analysis and solutions, it also delivers a broader political vision for the reordering of global politics in a progressive light. While reading the new Socialist International's President Pedro Sanchez's speech in the volume, I couldn't help but feel what at least my generation nowadays calls FOMO, a fear of having missed out, in this case, on listening to a rousing, inspiring speech and presence about what social democrats and socialists are really fighting for. And it's especially fitting to have it delivered by a social democratic head of government who, with his left-wing coalition partners, has not just led an important advances for the labor movement in Spain, think of the new labor code or the riders law, and the digital and green transition, but gone a long way in protecting the population from the fallout of the poly crisis by making those who profit from it, like major energy companies, pay for social policies. And as he argues, this is the kind of politics we need to globalize. I quote him, "Our internationalism is the antidote to the myopic politics of trenches and borders. Today, with the withdrawal of a neoliberalism that was only interested in globalizing capital and markets, it is time to globalize rights and freedoms,
globalized climate justice, globalized equality, globalized democracy, and the dignity of the human being. So if the neoliberal and rules-based international order is actually in retreat, progressive Europeans, socialists, social democrats have a central role to play in shaping what comes next. And I think the FEPS Yearbook 2023 gives us ample food for thought and a reason to return to the volume in the coming months to see where we left off, how to understand where we're going and in what direction, and whether the predictions actually came true. As for the aesthetic part, I very much enjoy the austere layout of the volume. I kept it in my hand. It's clearly it's a nice print. It's a nice material. The only case I would probably make is for more visual elements to break it up and soften it up for the 2024 edition. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Daniel, for this kind and serious reflection about the content. And I'm coming to this side of the room because we are arriving to the highlight, the tradition within the tradition, which we also launched when the yearbook was born a few years ago, to also nominate a progressive person of the year. And we started in 2019, which was an election year, and the Spitzenkandidat of the socialist, Franz Timmermans, was almost a kind of natural choice. We went on selecting a young prime minister of our political family, Sanna Marin, who since became a star, but we started to develop this stardom some years ago. Then we went south and picked Roberto Gualtieri, who went from European Parliament to be a minister and then a leading municipal politician, making a victory out of a very difficult political situation in his city, Rome. And now we thought that there is no other choice but zooming on the humanitarian crisis, which is the consequence of this terrible war, and highlighting an important individual performance, which is the leadership to solve this humanitarian crisis in the EU country which is the most affected by the refugee crisis generated by the aggression. And FEPS was really lucky because we also had an opportunity to visit Warsaw, to visit the district where some of the refugees, mainly obviously women with children, concentrated and found the helping hand. And there is probably no greater expression of solidarity, which comes at the time of a humanitarian crisis. Some of the speakers before me, starting with the president, already congratulated the mayor from Warsaw, Grzegorz Pietruczuk, who welcomed FEPS, presented his difficult conditions, and I would even say heroic efforts to help the refugees from Ukraine. And because of this impressive performance, I would like to hand over, on behalf of FEPS, this little present to you, and I would like to ask you to share with us your experience and summarize what you delivered in this tough year.
Thank you very much, László. Thank you very much, the whole team. Sophia is very patient for me, believe me, and Maria, László, Anna, the comrades, friends. It's a great honor for me to receive the title of the Progressive Person for the year 2023. It's a great distinction but also an obligation on continue hard work. This award not only for me, but for my entire team, co-workers, residents of District Bielany also, and over 600 volunteers. You see on this video that we have a lot of volunteers, because the volunteers, that is our power, the power to support the refugees in our country, in Poland, in Warsaw. And this February 24, 2022 is the date which the lives of million inhabitants, not only from Ukrainian but also Poles, have changed. This is the date of Putin Russian attack on the Ukrainian people. For me, it's also a very important day, because this day also had a very strong impact on my life and for my all inhabitant on my district. Every single day we complicated and solve the problems and help the Ukrainian refugees. At the peak of the March and April 2022, we had over 25,000 refugees in our district. We have over 1,500 Ukrainian children in our school, kindergartens or high schools. We create 2 refugees center. This one of them is from the Lindego Street. We have almost 400 places from the people who arrived in the middle of the night, because the trains from the Przemyśl arrived to us at 1 a.m., 2 a.m. And we have this the third this refugee center. We cooperate with the Catholic Church and the Orthodox Church and prepare another place, because we have too many refugees in this time. 100 of Ukrainian families will welcome us by Polish families. We had occupied the hostels, hotels, school dormitories, etc. All places in our district were occupied by refugees. We have created a special point from the food, from the supplies, from the medicine and medical supplies, because this is very important, because a lot of persons who arrive to us, they are very sick after the 4, 5, maybe 6 days by travel. Somebody they go to the Polish border by walk with the children on their hands. But we provide everyone with a roof on their heads and possibility of a peaceful life. In this moment, we have over 1,000 Ukrainian children in our schools, and we estimate that we have 12,000, maybe 10, maybe 12,000 the refugees in our district. But day by day, this grows, because as you know, the Ukrainian is bombing day by day, and a lot of people, refugees, arrived to us again. But this is not only one thing what we prepare. We send over 40 transport through the Ukraine to many cities, to Lwów, Kiev, Czerkasy, Hostomel, Ivano-Frankovsk, Dniepro, and we send the supplies, we send the food. On the next Monday we send another transport with the food package. And we send over 3,000 food package, and the part of our district is 250, and we buy from myself from this. But this is not everything. You saw the children. This is the children from the orphans. they are the orphans. We have over 300 children. We support them. They are from the beautiful place in the Ustka. This is the small city in the Polish seaside. They evacuate on the marsh a few days. A few days later, the Russian army occupied the Boyarka, but they are saved in the Poland. But maybe you know, but probably over 20,000 Ukrainian children disappear. They disappeared. They was taken by the Russian army and sent to the Russia. Nobody knows what has happened with them. We are talking with the refugees about it because a lot of them told the story, and this story was written by our officers because that will be the story after the war, because the Ukrainian government decide that they will be searching these children in the Russia. And on the picture we have the deputy minister of who is responsible from the refugees from the Ukrainian government. She visited us 2 times, and she spent a lot of time with us. And some solution that we have in our district, we share in the other cities in the Poland. This is thank you for this progressive yearbook. I'm not film the progressive person. I'm only do what I should do in this situation, because I never supposed that we have the war so close Polish border. I never supposed on 20 February that a few days later we have the refugees in the district. I thank you, the UNICEF, because UNICEF is the organization who support us in the many direction and send a lot of support to the children, especially for the children. But we need a lot of support, because in this moment we are waiting for the next wave, because probably we will have the next wave if the Belarus attack the Ukraine. We estimate that we have in the Poland 3, maybe 5 million refugees more. So we are on the duty all the time. We prepare because our points are on the alarm system. If something is happened, we open then in the 24 hours. Thank you very much for everything. And
many thanks. If you turn that way, I think the picture can be taken if... yeah. Look, we don't have pre-cooked question to the mayor, but we have a few more minutes. So if you have a question or you would like to comment, raise your hand, and I will do my best to spot those who would like to intervene from the floor. Yes? Mike?
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for coming to speak. I wanted to ask an open question, which is what more can the EU do, and what more can we do, maybe as individuals, to help on the ground when there is such crisis, in the long run as well, not just the here and now, not just a shelter, but really over what might be years of a crisis, even if the war ends soon. Thank you.
What we need support, because, for example, we have in this moment the most important problem for me, for the Ukrainian children, that we estimate that almost the 30% of our children from the Ukraine, they have the battlefield syndrome. And this is not for the 1 week, for a month, this is for the years. We have 5, maybe in this moment 6 psychologists to support these children. But these children, believe me, they afraid of planes, they afraid of noises, they afraid a tramp, for example. And for me, this is the main problem, because a part of these children are under deep depression. So this is because the children from the second wave, because we have the refugees near Kharkov, they saw the war. the soil on the ice, and after a few months later, we have some problem because they went to our schools, to the kindergarten, and in these places, our teacher says, okay, we have a lot of problems, not with the behavior, but with some mental problem, what the students see. So, in the UK.
Can help your work, your amazing work.
Help, of course, the one of the solution is the money, like always. But this is the money not the main problem, because we need specialists to working with the children. This is the main problem, because we don't have enough Ukrainian teachers in Poland, because a lot of they stay, for example, the doctors have to stay in the Ukrainian, okay, support the Ukrainian army, and we have the type of this problem. And from this month, we have a lot of support from the many countries. For example, from the United States, Malta, Holland, from the Belgium, we have a lot of support in my district. We have a lot of transport, humanitarian transport, and when I was talking with the Ukrainian people, they need everything in the Ukraine. Probably in the next month I will be in the Ukraine with the next transport, because tomorrow I'm going to this Ustka from our children, because we have a lot of equipment. They need the equipment to learn, because the part of the Ukrainian children, they went to the Ukrainian school by internet, but they don't have the iPads, computers, iPhones. We gave them everything what we had, but that is not enough. So we try to buy this by UNICEF, and UNICEF support us. This is the very, very important support, but we need more equipment, for example, too.
Thank you so much. I was going to ask, what sort of obstacles do you face when you cooperate with the Polish government? But it's a new year. Let's be positive. What sort of support do you get from the Polish authorities?
From the Polish government? No. This is the good story. Really, believe me, because the situation with the war was surprising for our government too. I don't know what is happened between the CIA and our government, what is about the knowledge about the war, but the government gave the first money to us after 46 days of war, 46. And we waiting for this money, but generally all of the support were prepared by people, by ordinary people with the private industries from my district. They pay 1,100,000 Polish zlotys to buy everything what we need, because the people who arrive to us, they arrive on the middle of the night without the clothes, without the documents sometimes. They have only one bag with the food. The food they taken by our volunteers in the Przemyśl, because the Przemyśl, the city on our border, and this is the one thing what they have. So we have prepared everything, and I don't, of course, I don't love my government, but this is my government, of course, but this is the right. But our government sent, because the mayors like me, the marshal of the region, we are responsible from the refugees. But generally, our government send equipment and weapons to Ukraine, and this is the some solution, because of course, we are responsible from my district. This is the over 150,000 people. So if I have 25 more in the 1 month, this is the, of course, this is some challenge for me and for my staff. Yes, but I have the wonderful inhabitants. So I believe in the people, not the government. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
I think Pascal Lamy and other authors will have other opportunities to connect with us in future FEPS activities. Since we started and also ended with the topic of the war, let me also mention that FEPS is planning for February 23 an online event which is going to mark the first anniversary of this invasion and also present, summarize what we have been doing and also promote what we will publish in the coming periods. So if you are particularly interested in the subject, I recommend watching and connecting with this online event when the time comes. Now, we said that we would end the formal part of this meeting around 7:30. It is 7:30. And I think it's not a secret that we have been planning and preparing some hospitality to make it a serious, although modest, New Year reception. This has been fully prepared. I thank my colleagues who have been working on the organization of the formal part, but also the informal part. I think I should thank you for the attention. Congratulate once more the Progressive Person of the Year. Thank the authors for contributing, and wish you a nice evening for the rest of this gathering, because hopefully you will find the conversations on these topics interesting also in the next 1 hour. Thank you again and wish you all the best.